What's going on, Colts Nation? Appreciate you dropping by today. And for today, I want to talk more about free agency. And we've been talking about wide receivers, obviously, a lot of conversation about Pittman Jr. and Marvin Harrison Jr. But there's another conversation that I think we should talk about, something that I've seen a lot on Twitter over these last couple weeks. We just talked about Paris Campbell last night and talked about that situation that everybody has been talking about. But the other thing I've been seeing is people talking about, like, what do we really need the most, right? What are the biggest need for the Colts going into the offseason? And that's what I wanted to look at. So starting with the wide receivers, obviously whether or not we re-sign Michael Pittman Jr. is a big part of this. But I guess in this instance, we'll operate under the assumption that Michael Pittman Jr. will come back. And assuming he comes back and he assumes that number one role, then when you look at it and you end up with Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs as your 1 and 2, Alec Pierce is the third receiver, but he plays as second outside receiver. And then at the number 4 spot, you have DJ Montgomery, who was able to make some plays there at the end of the season. We'll see if he's ever really going to become anything. And of course, you're going to have Ashton Dulin coming off of the IR next year. So when you look at the receivers and you think about the fact that, we were probably going to draft a wide receiver, like, it's a crowded room. So when you look at it like that, like, there's depth at the position. The question is, do we need to go out of our way to get top tier, more top tier depth? And there's an argument for both of those. Like, even if you have Michael Pittman Jr. come back, like, yeah, it's going to help Anthony Richardson out. The more talent you bring in, the better your quarterback's going to be able to be. But also, when you look at it, like, if there are other positions in need, then maybe wide receiver slides down a little. So the other ones that I want to talk about here are going to be defensive end and cornerback. And I'm going to start with the defensive end, and really this is more of a defensive line conversation, right? That interior has to be figured out if we don't end up re-signing Grover Stewart. When you look at it, Kwity Paye, he just that's the odd man out, right? You look at the defensive line as a whole. Kwity Paye, DeForest Buckner, Samson Ebukam, obviously Grover Stewart. If Grover Stewart's not around, then presumably you would have Tommy Ade stepping into that spot next year, maybe Eric Johnson. But, the defensive line, yeah, they got 51 sacks. Okay, they had 4 different people get 7+ sacks. But what this team is really missing from that standpoint, from that pass rush, is somebody that can consistently cause pressure, consistently cause havoc in a game, right? And yeah, it's hard to get guys like TJ Watt and Myles Garrett and those kinds of players, but it's possible. You got to be able to do something, and the Colts have options. They can go into free agency and go get a really good pass rusher this offseason. There are a couple guys that look like they may be leaving their current team to go somewhere else. The Colts have the money while Anthony Richardson is on his rookie contract. If they don't go spend money on a wide receiver in free agency outside of Michael Pittman Jr., and they're going to let somebody else go like a Grover Stewart, then go ahead, pay a guy that's a pass rusher, give him big money, let him come in and let him wreak havoc. Because Samson Ebukam showed that he can have a good pass rush, right? He was inconsistent throughout the season, but he would string games together where he was doing really well. So Samson Ebukam, happy with him. And then you have DeForest Buckner in the middle. And whatever you decide to do next to DeForest Buckner is whatever they decide to do. But I think that getting that guy on the edge is extremely important, which is why we've talked about previously on this channel about Kwity Paye being traded this offseason, trading him for whatever you can get him for, because whoever gets him is either getting a 1-year rental or they're getting a guy that they're going to have to give some sort of contract to, so you get less draft capital in return for that. But Kwity Paye is a guy that could be expendable, or you bring somebody in, and then at least for one season, you just use Kwity Paye as a depth piece. And if anything happens on the line, you can bring Kwity Paye in to be a starter again. But I think there are a lot of advantages to signing somebody, right? And of course, the top of the class coming out right now in free agency is going to be Brian Burns and Josh Allen from the Jaguars. So when you look at it, like we mentioned, you have Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam. Those are starters. Now, Dio Dangbo looked really, really good as the year has gone on. Like, ever since he came back to play, he just seems to consistently be getting better. Even in 2022, when the whole team was bad, he was a guy that throughout the season, he just felt like he was gaining confidence. He felt like he was just figuring it out as a pro. You know, it was basically his rookie season in 2022. So he was figuring it out and then he seemed to get better. This year, he had moments in different games where he was just dominant, like an absolute dominating force. So Dio Dangbo is somebody that excites me a lot, somebody that I'm glad that we have as depth. Another guy is Taekwon Lewis, who before the ACL injury on the interception looked like he was about to finally be able to become a star. And since that injury, like he definitely had moments this season, had times where he was putting pressure on, but he's, I feel like him and Quiddy are basically the same player. Like they'll get you some pressures, they'll get a couple sacks throughout the season, and they're good in the run game, but they're not consistent enough to really be that guy. So getting Taekwon Lewis is a good depth piece, somebody that's good to have on the team. But are they really going to stay with that, right? They just drafted Titus Leo last year, and I think they're going to want to try to see what that can develop into. So I feel like one way or another, there's going to be a spot on the team for him. Now, if Titus Leo ended up being on the practice squad in his second year coming off the injury and could figure it out like that, and then eventually step in, right? If, Kwity Paye leaves, after 2024, then Titus Leo can step up from the practice squad to the active and then be on the active roster in his third season. And this is a little, forward forecasting, but this just seems like, right, this is what teams have to do. When you're looking at free agency, you're looking at the draft, they have to think of what's happening in the future and the different moves that they're going to try to make, right? Guys that they know that they like, guys that they know they will want on the team. So these are things that I feel like Chris Ballard and his team are going to be looking at, right? Titus Leo on the team in the future. And it feels like one way or another, the Colts could really benefit from getting somebody that could give a consistent pass rush, right? You get that kind of edge on the team. And when you can get a consistent pass rush, it helps your corners be great, right? And if you think about the Colts secondary situation, imagine if we had a guy like Josh Allen from the Jaguars this year, in 2023, then things could have been different for the secondary, right? When you're putting pressure on the quarterback, you're making him make quicker decisions. He might make a bad decision. It goes hand in hand. That's why football is a team game. It all matters. If you don't have a pass rush at all, it doesn't matter how good your corners are, they're not going to be able to make plays. Just like if you don't have corners, but you have a good pass rush, like at some point, you're just going to continue to get burned. And unfortunately for the Colts, in their defense, they just don't have that consistent pressure to the quarterback. They can't get there consistently. They can't close the pocket fast enough consistently, and the secondary gets hit because of it. So when you're looking at Juju Brents, you're looking at Jalen Jones, you're looking at Dallas Flowers. We can't forget about him. Next year is only going to be his third year. It just feels like the Colts could be better served, possibly going for a defensive end. But again, we just had those names. Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, the rookies played really well. Like that is the future of the franchise at that position, presumably. Like they both look really good. And Juju Brents obviously just has to be able to stay on the field. But both those guys could be absolute game wreckers, right? And then Dallas Flowers coming back. But outside of those three guys, they don't really have a whole lot more at cornerback, right? You have Kenny Moore, who obviously plays in that slot position. But I feel like there's just as good a chance that Kenny Moore doesn't get re-signed as he could get re-signed. And I think it'd be smart to re-sign Kenny Moore. It's really hard to find good cornerbacks like him in the league, good slot cornerbacks, guys that can play both man and zone on the inside, can make plays in the pass game and in the run game. Like Kenny Moore is different, man. He really is built different. I think it'd be smart to repay him, but if they don't, then you're looking at, what are they going to do? I feel like Dallas Flowers might be their answer for a guy that they can fit in the slot. And then you have Juju Brents and Jalen Jones on the outside, or maybe Juju Brents is in the slot since he's such a physical corner. He's so good in the run game, such a good tackler. Maybe he's the guy that they're thinking, hey, maybe we can try to make him our slot corner and we can have Dallas Flowers and Jalen Jones on the outside. But the argument for Colts going with a cornerback instead of going with edge rushers or with wide receivers is the fact that there's really no more depth outside of that, right? If you have your starters, like you look beyond the starters, you have Amir Speed, you have DJ Baker, who we all know how that goes. Like some games he's decent, some games he's really bad. And he had a missed tackle in the Texans game that proved to be pretty massive in the whole grand scheme of things. So when you're looking at the corner situation, you got to get depth at that position. So what this all comes down to is of course again talking about what do we need the most, and those are the three positions that I keep seeing the most of: wide receiver, defensive end, and cornerback. And I'm at the point where, the more I've seen what other people are saying, like I'm an open-minded person. I'm just gonna stick to what I think. I think wide receivers are vitally important. I think you have to have a couple of great ones to really have, long-term success in the NFL, right? To go deep into the playoffs, you need those guys, unless you have, somebody that's special, right? Like Patrick Mahomes had, well, I guess he has Rashee Rice has really stepped up, and Travis Kelsey. But quarterbacks like that can do more with less. But the more you get a quarterback and surround him with elite talent, like Joe Burrow got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, like they went to the Super Bowl. The Bengals, of all teams, went to the Super Bowl. So there's always an argument for going to get that wide receiver. But in this instance, this is one where I look at the defense and I think, even though I like a lot of the talent that's on the defense, we got to get deeper and we got to get more consistency, right? Got to find a star at some level. And I honestly think that going into next year, Nick Cross is probably going to be a starter for us. I think that's going to be beneficial. Hopefully, Ronnie Harrison Jr. is going to be able to stick around, and maybe he comes back next year. I thought he was pretty good. Maybe he gets added to linebacker depth. He can still play safety if we absolutely needed him to. But the question here is, do you go defensive end or do you go cornerback? And at the end of the day, and we're talking free agency, we're talking draft. Like, I think you go and get a pass rusher from free agency. And then if there's a great corner, I mean, somebody who's like, you already know they're going to be really good in the NFL kind of corner. Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley, these guys, right? Like, you just kind of knew these guys are going to be great. If there's one of those guys at corner when pick 15 rolls around, or if we can trade up a couple picks and get it, whatever, just assuming Chris Ballard being Chris Ballard, we stay at 15 and we're able to get one of those corners, then go ahead, bring him in. I'm more than okay using the draft to get corners. But this is where I'm at with this, is that if one of those, for sure stars aren't there in the first round when the pick comes up, then I think the Colts should go with wide receiver. They're so deep in this draft at wide receiver. I think the Colts should go wide receiver at 15 and then use a couple picks, just like last year, second round pick on a corner, then use one later in the draft. Right? Colts drafted 3 corners last year, second round, 5th round, 7th round. The 2nd and the 7th ended up being really good. 5th, not even on the team anymore. So go ahead, pick up another corner, right? Or, again, second round corner and then another one later in the draft. And I think that's the avenue that is likely, maybe. Because, again, I feel like, those really top end corners might be gone, although there are a lot of teams in the top 10, and you could even say the top 12 that are going to go, either quarterback or wide receiver. There are going to be a lot of those taken in those first 10 to 12 picks. So we'll see what really happens. There could be one of those star cornerbacks there ready for us when pick 15 rolls around. And if that's the case, and go get that guy and go have depth, and then you have massive competition at the position going into the 2024 season. And you also have options as you go into the future and have to continue to build the team, years down the road, which again is what GMs and all their front office guys, that's what they have to think about, is what you're doing right now, what you're doing this year, but also what are you going to be doing in the future? Continue to plan ahead and see how that plan has changed year in and year out. So, that's what I think should happen. I think, edge rusher, again, free agency, edge rusher. And then the draft, cornerback, draft multiple of them again this year. Start to build your depth through the draft. See if you can have more guys that you can develop into really, really good NFL players. Okay, and of course, I would love to know what your opinion is of all this down in the comment section. Is there another position that we didn't talk about that you think the Colts should be targeting in the draft or in free agency? What do you think our biggest needs are this offseason? You let me know down in the comment section. Of course, I'll take whatever you guys are saying, and we'll talk about this again in the future. So with that said, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you get notified when any more videos do come out. We're going to continue to have conversations like this leading up to free agency, leading up to the draft. All right, we're going to continue to try to have a good time here and hopefully maybe speed this offseason along, because these football off seasons can be really long sometimes. So again, make sure you have those notifications turned on so you get notified anytime a video comes out. And of course, I appreciate you stopping by for another video. As always, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and go Colts.